So hello everyone, I am Grace Lee. I will be leading this art break today, and our topic is art as story. And so we are going to be talking about identity, immigration, diaspora, all through different lenses of art. To give you a little bit of background about me, I am a third year medical student starting my rotations in the hospital this June. I'm also a tour guide here at the Cantor and Anderson, and I'm also an author. My debut novel, Portrait of a Thief, came out last week. So all very exciting, and we'll have a little bit more of conversation on that later. And this is just a view of the Cantor Museum. Hopefully some of you have been, and some of you will get the opportunity to visit in the future. It is a beautiful museum located right on Stanford campus. It opened in 1894 and holds over 30,000 pieces of art across Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and of course, many more. And we will be talking about just a couple of my favorite pieces today. To give you a bit of background about me and how I got to the Cantor and Anderson, I am a medical student. I started at Stanford in 2019, and I discovered at some point when I was visiting the Cantor, I think I was walking around and I heard someone else leading a tour talking about how students were able to get involved as tour guides. And so I was immediately fascinated. I have always loved art in general, but also growing up, I didn't have very much experience with museums. I didn't have much of a background in it as someone who studied STEM. And so I wanted to experience all of the joys of art, but also make it accessible to those of us who maybe don't have formal art training or formal background in it, to show that art can really be enjoyed and appreciated by everyone. And it's been a real treat to be working at the Cantor and Anderson for these past couple of years now, and also to use my experiences as a museum tour guide in the writing of my book. So my novel is an Asian American heist novel about college students stealing looted art from Western museums. So a lot of fun drawing on my own museum experience and thinking about what museums display and how they play a role in shaping history and what we remember. So to get us started into our topics for today, we are going to be looking closely at two pieces. And here at the Cantor and Anderson, we practice something called close looking, which is when we look at a piece, we first take a few moments to solely observe, so to note just what we see in a piece, and then we interpret it. And then finally, we'll come together and discuss the context, the artist, the history behind the piece. So now a bit of interactivity will be starting, so get ready. This is the first piece that we are looking at, and so take about 30 seconds, take a look at this piece of art, which is currently on display at the Cantor, and then type what you see into the chat. So Susan starting us off with different gradations of purple, and yeah, I absolutely see that too. Ooh, sorry about that. My mouse is playing games with me. And then we see a well-dressed woman in front of some sort of strange structure. And so we're seeing the structure in the background, and also this woman who's wearing very elegant clothing, it looks like to me. An elegant Asian woman, 40s hat. You have this pink sky, which is also something that I noticed because it's not a normal color that you would expect from a sky. And we also see this barbed wire in the background, fancy attire. So it looks like a lot of people are noticing what this woman is wearing, and also how it kind of contrasts with the background, because we have this very elegant, very well-dressed woman, and a lot of people are noting that her clothes seem maybe not our contemporary age, maybe from several decades ago. And then maybe a blood trail. We have these observations. And I'm guessing that comes from the red over here. Okay, so these are really wonderful observations. I love the observations about color because that's something that I really noticed. And then I see that we've started moving into the interpretation, and which is really excellent. And so it seems like some people from the structure in the background and the barbed wire, and maybe the historical context, were making educated interpretations about where this woman is coming from, whether this is a concentration camp, an internment camp. And I would say that all of these observations are really astute and really spot on. And so we will start talking a bit about the background of the artist and the history of this piece. But as we do, feel free to continue adding your observations into the chat. I love all the questions and the thoughts about how this woman is all alone and how we see her face covered. And we also see she looks like she's wearing gloves and tights. And so we really don't see very much of her skin besides this bit over here. And so this piece is called Lush Life #2. It was painted in 2008 by the Japanese American artist Roger Shimomura. And so Shimomura was heavily influenced by Andy Warhol and the pop art movement. And so we see a lot of these bright colors, this kind of very classically American comic book style. But at the same time, as many of you observed, we also see this sharp contrast with what the woman is wearing and her elegance with the background and the barbed wire. And so to provide a little bit of historical context, which some of you already touched on, this was painted with the artist's memories of the Japanese internment camps, which is when about 120,000 Japanese Americans, many of them citizens, were forcibly placed in internment camps out of suspicions of disloyalty during the war. And so Roger Shimomura, like many Japanese Americans who grew up in that time, was heavily influenced by this experience. And so many of his paintings and his arts showed those memories and those questions that he grappled with growing up. And there are several interpretations of this piece, and some think that this presents an alternate, maybe fictional history of Asian America where the internment camps maybe didn't happen and Asian Americans were able to achieve this wealth and this luxury without this dark history. For me personally, I see this piece and I think about the complexity of what it means to be Asian American here in the United States, where on one hand, especially right now, and as times are changing, Asian Americans do have a lot more wealth, a lot more influence within the country, but at the same time, it is really impossible to leave behind the truth of discrimination, persistent racism, and the internment camps, what many Asian Americans have suffered in American history. And so I look at this piece and I see everything that can be true about Asian America in terms of both our success and the difficulties that we faced in the past and are continuing to face. So that is a very whirlwind overview of Lush Life #2. Feel free to add new observations or thoughts into the chat. But really, I am so glad to be here with you on this art break because this is an opportunity for me to talk about all my favorite pieces. I think this is one of the many pieces at the Cantor that really rewards you the more time you spend looking at it because, well, as all of you saw from first glance, this is a really interesting and intriguing and complicated piece, even without knowing any of the historical background, but it really does get richer and more thoughtful once we know a little bit more about Shimomura and his motivations behind painting it. And so before we move on to our next piece, I just wanted to share a picture and a quote by the artist himself. And so he paints many of these sort of like pop art inspired pieces. And one of the quotes I love from him is, when people laugh, they open up their mouth, and that's when you can shove things in. And so, all these pieces are really bright, really fun, really interesting, but also they have a lot of deeper meaning and context once we get a little bit more time. Okay, so I'm loving everything in the chat. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. Next up, we have another piece, so I'm excited for more conversation around that one. Okay, so this is our next piece. It is also currently on display at the Cantor, and so if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to make a visit and take a look, because it's hard to capture the scope of it just from a picture, but it spans about 3 walls on the second floor of the Cantor. So it's massive. Take a second and look at it. Remember our practice of close observation. So first we describe just what we see, and then we begin to interpret and think about meaning, and then we'll discuss historical context. So take a moment in the chat, type what you see here, and then we'll talk. Okay, so starting us off, a lot of colorful books on the shelves, maybe biography books. I think the first thing that caught my eye was also all the bright colors. And so we have these different colors, textures, sizes, all the different patterns. Yeah, the multicolored spines with different prints. And then some people are also noticing the names. So I'm guessing the names that we see over here. Rows and rows of books, colorful textiles, feels like fabrics. Great. I'm trying to read all of them, but it's so hard to keep up because there's a lot of fun stuff happening. But yeah, we have a bunch of books, and then looks like people are starting to observe the names of the authors, maybe, and how they seem to be from different countries. Makes me smile. Great, because I love this piece too, and it always makes me smile seeing it. Okay, so to summarize, and feel free to keep putting things into the chat, but here we have a bunch of books, we have a lot of colors, a lot of textures, and then we're also observing things about the names. Let's keep books alive, wonderful. And so let's talk a bit about the background. Feel free to keep putting in your observations. But this piece is called The American Library by Yinka Shanabari, a British Nigerian artist who created this in 2018. So there are 6,000 books on the shelves, and about 3,200 of them have names printed in gold foil. And so many of them will be names that you recognize, and then others will be names that you don't. But all of them are by immigrants, children of immigrants, or descendants of the Great Migration, which is when Black Americans moved away from the American South because of persistent discrimination and Jim Crow laws. And so here there are names like Barack Obama, Bruce Lee, Toni Morrison. There are also names like Mike Pence and Donald Trump. So all individuals who have been very influential to American history, but also maybe have different views toward immigration. And to talk a little bit about the fabrics, because I think it is so much fun. And one of the first things that I noticed, and one of the things that many of you pointed out, is that these fabrics have a very long and interesting history in that they're inspired by Indonesian batik fabric, and these are Dutch wax textile fabrics. So produced in the Netherlands, sold in West Africa, and really a symbol of African identity and culture. So the fabrics have as complex and as interesting a history as, I think, really the American Library itself. I love this description in the chat where it says the books are splendid in their abundance, which I absolutely agree. It's a lovely exhibit, a lovely piece of art to see in person, because there are 6,000 books, and in addition to the 3,200 in gold foil, we also have a couple thousand that don't have names. And so Shanabari has said that these could represent many things. They could represent individuals who wanted to immigrate but who weren't able to, individuals who were lost along the way, or stories that have yet to be written and so are still on the way. So these are not all authors, they are all individuals who have been influential to American history in some way. And so their stories here are captured in the American Library, and there are more stories to tell in the future. Absolutely, this is a labor of love. Okay, so just to bring it all together briefly before we move to the Q&A part of the art break, I wanted to talk very briefly about my own experience with art and the influence of these pieces. And so my debut novel came out last week, and over here is what I thought was a really truthful description of why I wrote the book, in that it is an Asian American heist novel. So, there's a lot of talking about art and colonialism and aspects like that, but it's also really, to me, a story about Asian American identity and what it means to be Chinese American in a changing world, grappling with these big questions of immigration, identity, and diaspora and belonging. And I think one of the reasons why I love art so much is because it raises those questions. And so for me, writing this book was an exploration of those same questions and also an opportunity to interact with all the art that I love so much in a new way. So that brings us to the end of my short discussion, our whirlwind tour of a couple of my favorite pieces of the Cantor, and also just a bit of background on myself and how I got to art and to being a tour guide and also to writing into medicine. Thank you all for joining me. We do have a couple minutes left for questions. And so feel free to put questions into the chat if they come up. And while you're thinking of your questions, I will just remind you that there are more art breaks in the future. And so lots of opportunities. All of you know how to RSVP because you've done it once already, but stay tuned for more of these very brief, very fun half-hour overviews of fun art. In terms of what is next for me, thank you for the questions in the chat, by the way. So I am working on a new book set at Stanford, which is really exciting. And also I am starting my hospital rotations in a couple months. And so I will probably be a little bit busy, but full of a lot of exciting stuff. When can we go on a tour with you? I gave a tour this past weekend, and so hopefully I will be able to do maybe one or two more before I start in the hospital, or even while I'm, on my weekends when I'm not in the hospital. But a lot of the objects that I cover in the tour were ones that I got to choose for here. So anyone who's come to an art break, you've gotten a little taste of what my tours look like, and I always have a lot of fun doing them. How has my experience as an art guide influenced my medical studies or vice versa? I actually took a really great class in the medical school run by physicians called Art as Observation. And so I think that is the best description of the influence of art on medicine, and also the other way around, in that both art and medicine require you to think very deeply and thoughtfully about the world around you, to make observations, whether it's about people or artworks, and then to make interpretations. So the practice of close looking, which I love, I apply to both my tours and whenever I visit museums, but also when I speak to patients and I try to get their history and find out what brought them in today. Okay. So it looks like, oh, there's some more questions coming in. Wonderful. So I will answer a few more of these, and then I will let you all go eventually so that we don't go over time. So thank you all for attending. Would your book be appropriate for a high school audience? I think so. I think it would probably be best suited for maybe a little bit later in high school. The main characters are in their early 20s, so they are about to graduate college. And I think that one of the themes that I really wanted to address was the feeling of, you know, entering adulthood and feeling unmoored or trying to figure out the direction that you're going to take in life and leaving, some of your friends behind. And I think that those feelings towards late college can also be translated to late high school. How to get a schedule of the tour. Tours occur every weekend at the Cantor and the Anderson. And so you can always check the website for the Anderson and the Cantor and see when tours happen, because there are a bunch of other very talented student guides around. And so if it's not me, it's going to be someone else. And either way, you're going to get a very fun and engaging tour. What is the piece in front of the museum steps? The text piece, oi or yo. I love this piece. It is called oi/yo. So it is exactly what it sounds like, and it's so large and so fun. So I encourage any of you around to go and take a look at it. So there are a bunch more questions. I'm going to try and get to them all before we reach our end. I love this one. Which art piece influenced your book or story? I think really both of the ones that we discussed here, Lush Life #2 and the American Library, as well as many of the others that the Cantor has on rotation. I really love art by contemporary artists and especially artists of color, because I think they really broaden my understanding of what art could be. And I think that they always do really, really fun things when talking about identity and what it means to be American. So all of them, I think we are all a composite of all the art that we've experienced in the past. I love this question over here about the American Library, how the uniformity of the covers and the fabric obscures the book covers. And so the questions, who the books belong to and where were they found? So I also feel like the books look like they could really have been found everywhere. And I'm not sure about the exact details over here, but I think more information is available online, because the American Library does have its own website with a lot of information by the artist, Yinka Shanabari. I think part of the purpose, at least for me, is the fabrics do obscure the exact book beneath. And so you're challenged to think about the fabrics and the names printed on it. And also, maybe the parts of the story that we don't get to see beyond the name. So definitely, it seems like a purposeful choice to me. Okay. Thanks everyone for all the questions. I am scrolling through all of them, and so trying to answer them all, but you all are very fast, which I love. We have a question here about top 3 favorite museums to visit. Hard to say, obviously the Cantor, because I work here, so the Cantor and the Anderson, but also there is the Museum of Chinese in America in New York City. There's also the Met. I was at the Louvre a while back, and obviously a lot of fun, and also extremely large. But yeah, I love all museums. And then the artist for my book cover, it's actually from a photograph and not a painting. And so the Penguin Random House art team really did an excellent job with that. So I think we've covered just about everything. If you have additional questions, then feel free to attend future art breaks to learn more. You can also hop over to the Cantor and Anderson on social channels. You can also find me on social media at Grace D. Lee. And I also have a website that has all my up-to-date information. So that is just about everything. Thank you everyone for attending and letting me talk about my book and all my favorite pieces of art. This was so much fun. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for coming to this half-hour break.